I was the architect of certainty. I built empires of thought in the Emperor's name, and men believed me when I spoke of absolutes. Now I stare at the same equations and see only the spaces between the numbers, vast, empty and mocking. What am I if I can no longer believe my own theorems? My name is Hesperus Vrain, and I was the Loremaster Prime of the Administratum's Sixth Seal, the division that does not exist in any official record. We are the keepers of the forgotten truth, the custodians of the two empty plinths in the Hall of Primarchs. For 3 centuries, I have been the Emperor's own archaeologist of absence, tasked with maintaining the perfect void where the 2nd and 11th Legions once stood. I have deleted more knowledge than most scholars will ever accumulate. I have erased names from history with the precision of a surgeon excising tumors. I have made the lost remain lost, and I was magnificent at it. I remember the exactness of my conviction. The way my stylus would move across the parchment, redacting, amending, perfecting the silence. Each morning, I would descend into the vault of unrecorded things, 3 kilometers beneath the Administratum Palace, past Jean, locked gates that recognized only my specific pattern of augmetic implants, and I would review the day's anomalies. A fragment of armor bearing an unknown heraldry found on Calth. A tapestry in a forgotten chapel showing 20 figures instead of 18. A veteran's fever, dream ramblings about brothers who wore bronze and silver. Each piece of evidence would pass through my hands, and I would determine its fate, catalogued in the locked archives, or destroyed entirely. I was not cruel in this work. I was holy. I understood that some truths are too dangerous for the Imperium to bear, that the Emperor's silence on the matter of his lost sons was itself a commandment. The galaxy is already fracturing beneath the weight of heresy and alien invasion. What would it do to morale if the masses knew that 2 entire legions, tens of thousands of the Emperor's finest warriors, had been so thoroughly expunged that even their names were poison? No, better the perfect void. Better the maintained mystery. My chambers reflected this philosophy, everything in ordered ranks. My collection of forbidden tomes, each wrapped in null, thread cloth, arranged by degree of danger. My analysis engines, their cogitator screens displaying endless streams of data referencing historical records for inconsistencies. My personal altar to the Emperor, bare of all iconography save a single candle, because faith, true faith, requires no ornamentation, just the flame, just the purpose. I remember the day I completed the Apex protocol. It was the 14th year of my tenure, and I had finally achieved what 3 of my predecessors had died attempting, a complete algorithmic mapping of every known reference to the lost Primarchs, cross-indexed with probability matrices that could predict where new references might emerge. The protocol was beautiful. It could analyze 1 billion documents in an hour, flag suspicious patterns, and recommend remediation with 99.7% accuracy. I had automated uncertainty. I had made the void self-sustaining. I engaged the Apex protocol at 06's 14 Imperial Standard. The machines sang their litanies of activation. The data streams illuminated my chamber in flickering green light. I stood before the primary cogitator screen and watched as centuries of painstaking work crystallized into a single perfect system. The screen displayed an XPROKL CTIV, Vode me enetimae canavi, Eastidia mea JNC Raditi BY87, 3% OVR next millennium. I had won. I had secured the Emperor's silence for 1,000 years. I felt nothing, not satisfaction, not pride, not even the quiet joy of a craftsman seeing his magnum opus complete. I looked at those words, Vuid mei entinan chedi vidid, and a thought entered my mind, cold and clear as Terran icy. This means nothing. This number is meaningless. This work is meaningless. I dismissed the thought immediately. Fatigue. The culmination of years of intense labor. The body rebels when pushed too far, and even a mind as augmented as mine requires rest. I retired to my chambers, performed my devotions by rote, and slept for exactly 6 hours as my schedule demanded. But the feeling did not leave, it metastasized. The next morning, I returned to the vault as always. The gene locks recognized me. The great doors cycled open. The same 3-kilometer descent into the earth, past the same checkpoints, past the same servo skull patrols. Everything identical, everything correct. I reached my analysis station and called up the daily reports. 17 anomalies flagged across the segmentum solar. A veteran on Nocturne speaking of a 21st Primarch. A fresco in an abandoned chapel on Macrage, showing an additional figure in Crusade-era ceramite. A fragment of Vox recording from the Siege of Terra mentioning the brothers who were not there. Standard fare, routine work. I began my analysis. Subject 1, the veteran, age 97. Service record, Salamander's 3rd Company, retired with honors. Current status, hospice care, late-stage neural degradation. Conclusion, fever-induced confabulation, no remediation necessary. Subject will expire naturally within standard year. I logged the finding. Case closed. Subject 2, the fresco. Location, Chapel of the Final Martyr, abandoned since M39. Integrity assessment. Building scheduled for demolition due to structural instability. Conclusion, allow natural destruction. No active intervention required. Case closed. I moved through the 17 cases with mechanical efficiency. Each one analyzed. Each one resolved. Each one adding another brick to the wall of silence I had spent 3 centuries building. And with each case, the hollowness grew. I found myself staring at the data not with the sharp focus of investigation, but with a strange, distant curiosity, as if I were reading about someone else's work, someone else's purpose. The veteran on Nocturne, he was dying, and in his dying, he had reached for something that made sense of his service. A 21st brother. A pattern his fragmenting mind could recognize, and I had noted his death with the same clinical detachment I would note the malfunctioning of a cogitator. When had I stopped seeing people? The question came unbidden. I forced it away. Sentiment is the enemy of clarity. The individual must be subordinated to the whole. These are the first principles of the administratum, written in the blood of Terra's unification. I am not cruel. I am necessary. But the thought persisted. When had I stopped seeing people? I attempted to return to routine. The days blurred. I would descend to the vault, review the anomalies, make my determinations, ascend again to my chambers. I would perform my evening devotions, 30 minutes of contemplation before the Emperor's flame, reciting the litany of purpose. I would consume my paste rations at precisely 9 day. 100 I would sleep for exactly 6 hours. Everything the same, everything correct, everything hollow. My subordinates began to notice. Scribe Tertius Malon, who had served under me for 40 years, approached me on the 73rd day after the protocol's activation. We were in the archive of amended histories, and I was reviewing a set of documents that had been flagged for potential connection to the Lost Legions, a series of supply manifests from the Great Crusade showing material shipments to Legion designations that no longer existed in official records. "Lo, Master," Malon said, his augmetic voice crackling with poorly masked concern. "You have been staring at that same manifest for 17 minutes. The analysis should take no more than 5. Are your ocular implants functioning correctly?" I looked at him. He was 68 years old, his face a geography of augmetic replacements and age-worn flesh. He had given his entire adult life to this work, subordinating all personal desire to the maintenance of the Emperor's silence. A faithful servant. A good man by any reasonable measure. I realized I could not remember his first name. I had worked beside him for 4 decades, and I had never bothered to learn what his parents had called him before the administratum gave him his designation. "My implants function within normal parameters," I said. "Continue with your duties." He hesitated. "Lore Master, if I may, you seem diminished. Since the protocol's activation, perhaps you should petition for a sabbatical. Even the most devoted servants require. I do not require counsel on my well-being, Scribe Tertius. Resume your station." He left. I returned my attention to the manifest. Legion supply requisition, dated 03, M31, designation, quantity, 17,000 sets of Mark TIE power armor, delivered to. The numbers meant nothing. I stared at them, and they were just shapes. Just symbols on parchment. Some Lore Master who came before me, had decided these numbers were dangerous. Had decided they needed to be erased, and I had spent 3 centuries enforcing that decision, never once questioning whether it was correct. What was I protecting? A secret I did not understand, a silence whose purpose I had never investigated, only maintained. I was a guardian of a tomb I had never opened. The thought was heresy, of course. The Emperor had commanded the silence. That should be enough. Faith does not require understanding. But I found I could not remember when I had stopped asking why. That night, I attempted my devotions as always. I lit the candle before the Emperor's effigy. I knelt on the prayer stones, feeling their familiar pressure against my augmetic knees. I began the litany of purpose. I serve the Emperor's will. I am his hand in the dark. I maintain what must be maintained. I silence what must be silenced. I am the guardian of. The words stuck in my throat. I looked at the candle flame, watched it flicker, tried to feel what I had always felt, that connection to something vast and holy. That sense of being part of a divine plan. Nothing. Just a flame. Just wax and wick and chemical combustion. The same processes that occur in any flame, anywhere in the galaxy. Nothing sacred. Nothing divine. Just thermodynamics. I extinguished the candle with my fingers. Felt the heat. Felt nothing else. I sat in darkness and confronted the terrible truth. I had stopped believing, and I did not know when it had happened. Sleep became difficult. My augmetic implants regulate most biological functions, but the mind, the organic core that still processes thought, cannot be so easily controlled. I would lie in my sleep pod, eyes closed, and instead of rest, I would find myself analyzing the structure of my own doubt. Question: at what point does dedication become compulsion? At what point does faith become mere habit? I began reviewing my own logs. 3 centuries of daily reports, meticulously maintained. I loaded them into my personal cogitator and ran analytical algorithms, searching for patterns in my own behavior. The data was clear, disturbing, undeniable. Over 300 years, my terminology had shifted. In my first decade of service, my reports were filled with phrases like faithful execution of the Emperor's will and sacred duty to preserve the necessary silence. By my 2nd century, the language had become clinical, anomaly remediation, and historical integrity maintenance. In my most recent reports, I used words like processing efficiency and caseload optimization. I had transformed faith into bureaucracy. I had reduced the sacred to the administrative, and I had done it so gradually that I had never noticed the change. I ran deeper analysis, cross-referenced my reports with my medical logs. The correlation was stark. As my emotional language decreased, my augmetic enhancement increased. 37% of my brain was now mechanical. 62% of my sensory input was processed through cybernetic filters. I had slowly, methodically replaced the parts of myself that felt, until all that remained was the part that functioned. I had optimized myself into emptiness. The realization should have horrified me, should have driven me to immediate remediation, to seek counsel from the ecclesiarchy or the mechanicus. Instead, I felt only a cold, analytical curiosity. I had discovered a fascinating pathology. The fact that it was my own merely made the study more intimate. I began to research. Not the lost Primarchs, that was my official function. No, I began to research a different kind of loss. The loss of self. The archives of the 6th Seal contain more than just records of the forgotten legions. They contain all manner of uncomfortable truths, quarantined knowledge deemed too dangerous or too despairing for general consumption. I have access to all of it, by virtue of my position. I had never thought to turn that access inward, to use it for personal inquiry rather than official duty. I found the first reference on my 47th day of searching. A fragmentary account from an apothecary of the Emperor's children, written before the heresy. He described a condition he called purpose dissolution syndrome, a gradual erosion of meaning experienced by warriors who had spent too long at war, who had killed so many enemies that the killing became mechanical, who had seen so many atrocities that atrocity became mundane. The afflicted, he wrote, continues to function. He executes his duties with precision. He may even excel. But when questioned about his internal state, he reports a curious absence. The fire that drove him has gone out, and he cannot remember when it was extinguished. He becomes an echo of himself, a perfect, hollow shell. I read the passage 17 times. Each time, I felt the terrible recognition of seeing myself described. I found more. A treatise by a long-dead inquisitor on the psychology of those who serve in the Officio Assassinorum. The most effective killers, she wrote, are those who have successfully compartmentalized the act of killing from the fact of mortality. They can take a life with the same emotional register as filing a document. This is achieved through a slow process of disassociation, wherein the assassin separates the mechanical action from its moral weight. The danger is not that they will refuse to kill, they will never refuse. The danger is that they will forget why killing matters. Another piece. A philosophical text by a remembrancer who had embedded with the word-bearers during the Great Crusade, before their fall. He had documented the daily rituals of the Legion's chaplains, their constant prayers and devotions. I asked Chaplain Erebus, the text read, what he would do if he woke one morning and found he no longer believed. He looked at me with something approaching pity and said, I would continue exactly as I do now. Faith is not a feeling. It is a decision, made anew each moment. I found this answer profoundly disturbing. It suggested that for him, belief and unbelief were functionally identical. The texts accumulated. A pattern emerged. Across different contexts, different roles, different eras, the phenomenon was the same. People who dedicated themselves utterly to a single purpose, who performed the same actions day after day, year after year, century after century, would eventually find that the purpose had evaporated. The actions remained, but the meaning had drained away. It had a name, though no official designation. In the whispered conversations of those who had experienced it, it was called the Great Emptying. And it was, the text suggested, irreversible. I sat in my private reading chamber, surrounded by forbidden lore, and confronted the architecture of my own obsolescence. I had found my diagnosis: purpose dissolution syndrome, the Great Emptying, the documented end state of those who serve too long, too completely, too well. I was not broken. I was finished. There is a difference. I thought of the Apex Protocol, still running in the vault below. My masterpiece. The system that would maintain the Emperor's silence for a millennium without requiring my constant intervention. I had built myself a replacement. I had automated my own purpose. Of course the emptiness had come. I had completed the work. There was nothing left to do but perform maintenance on a system that no longer needed me. I logged my findings meticulously, as I logged everything, created a new file in my personal archive, Self-Diagnostic Loremaster Hesperus Vrain, Purpose Dissolution Assessment. I included all my research, all my analysis, all my terrible conclusions. Then I returned to my duties, because what else was there to do? The days continued. I reviewed anomalies. I made determinations. I maintained the silence. The work was the same. I was not. Scribe Tertius Malin approached me again, 3 months after my research had concluded. I was in my chambers staring at a data slate that showed the day's flagged anomalies, though I had not actually read any of them. Loremaster, he said, and I heard genuine fear in his synthesized voice. Please. You are frightening the junior scribes. Yesterday you approved the destruction of an entire library on Cypra Mundi without reviewing the inventory. You have never done that. You always review. Always verify. You are not yourself. I looked at him. Really looked, perhaps for the first time. Saw the concern in his augmetic eyes. Saw the genuine care beneath the fear. This man, whose first name I had never learned, was worried about me. Tell me, Malin, I said, do you believe in the work we do here? Do you feel its importance, or have you simply grown accustomed to it? He seemed taken aback. I serve the Emperor's will, Loremaster, as do you. That is not what I asked. He was silent for a long moment. Then, quietly, I do not know if I believe. I know only that I serve. Is that not enough? I used to think so, I said. I dismissed him. Returned to my data slate. The anomalies still meant nothing, but I processed them anyway. Because what else was there? That night, I received an unexpected communique. Priority Alpha. Seal of the Lord Commander of the Imperium himself. Such messages come perhaps once in a century. They are never trivial. I opened it with fingers that did not shake, though perhaps they should have. Repatosa entium iampa ilosa emendidet matia of utimasi argen cy apari armamendatai el iman, Guilliman, the return Primarch. The only loyal son to wake from death and find the Imperium he helped build now a decaying theocracy. I had never met him, though I had studied every text concerning him, every strategic doctrine, every recorded word. He was a figure of legend, and he was summoning me. I should have felt excitement, trepidation, something. Instead, I felt only that same cold curiosity. What could the Lord Commander want with a keeper of void? I made the journey to the Sanctum Imperialis, the administrative heart of imperial governance on Terra, the palace, fortress where the Primarch conducted the impossible task of steering the dying Imperium. I was processed through 17 security checkpoints, each one confirming my identity, my clearance, My purpose. I was brought to a private chamber, not a throne room, not a war room, just a simple space, almost monastic in its austerity. A desk, 2 chairs, a single window showing the sprawl of the imperial palace. Guilliman stood by the window. Even expecting his presence, the reality of him was overwhelming. He was massive, Jean, crafted to be more than human, built for war on a scale I could barely comprehend. He wore simple robes rather than his armor, but there was no mistaking what he was. He turned as I entered. His eyes, blue, ancient, haunted, fixed on me with an intensity that felt like physical weight. "Loremaster Vrain," he said. His voice was exactly as the records described, deep, controlled, bearing the weight of unimaginable authority. "You maintain the silence regarding my lost brothers." It was not a question. I nodded. "For 3 centuries you have kept the 2nd and 11th forgotten. You have done this work flawlessly, with a dedication that borders on obsession." He paused. "Why?" The question caught me off guard. Why? No one had ever asked me why. The work simply was. The Emperor had commanded it. That was sufficient. But looking into Guilliman's eyes that had seen the Emperor, had known him as a father, had watched the dream of the Imperium die in Horus's betrayal, I found I could not give him the bureaucratic answer. "I do not know anymore," I said. He studied me for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. Honesty, rare in this age. He gestured to one of the chairs. "Sit. I have something to tell you, and you will not want to hear it standing." I sat. He remained standing, a warrior who had forgotten how to rest. "The silence you maintain," Guilliman said, "is about to end. We have found them." The words did not make sense. Found. Whom? My lord. My brothers. The 2nd. The 11th. His face was unreadable. They did not die. They were not destroyed. They were exiled by the Emperor's command to a place outside the normal flow of time and space. A prison designed to last until the galaxy ended. He paused. "The prison is failing. They are returning." I felt something then, not excitement, not fear, just a vast, cosmic irony. 3 centuries of maintaining their absence, and now they were coming back. All my work, all my purpose, rendered meaningless in a single moment. "When?" I asked. "Soon. Months, perhaps. The precursor signs are already manifesting. Anomalies in the warp. Historical records reasserting themselves. People remembering what should have been forgotten." He looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. "Your Apex protocol has been flagging them, hasn't it? More and more each date. You cannot keep pace with the erasures anymore." He was right. The anomaly count had been climbing steadily. I had attributed it to statistical variance, to the natural chaos of the galaxy. But no. It was this. The universe remembering what I had spent 3 centuries making it forget. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I need you," Guilliman said bluntly. "I need someone who knows the shape of the void they left. Someone who understands what was taken away. When they return, the Imperium will fracture. Some will see them as saviors. Some as heretics. Some as impossibilities to be destroyed. Civil war is not just possible, it is likely." He leaned forward. "I need you to tell me, what did the Emperor hide? What were they? What did they do that required their absolute erasure?" I looked at him. This demigod, this legend, this son of the Emperor himself. He was asking me for knowledge I did not have. "I do not know, my lord," I said. "I only maintained the silence. I never knew its contents." "Then find out." His voice was hard. "You have access to archives I do not. Clearances beyond even my authority. The Emperor made certain compartments of knowledge accessible only to specific servants, for reasons I can only guess. Your office is one of them." He handed me a data slate. "These are the restricted files regarding my brothers. I can access none of them. You can access all of them." I took the slate, felt its weight, looked at the seal of the 6th shield encrypted on its surface. "If I do this," I said slowly, "if I break the silence, I will have destroyed everything I spent 3 centuries building." "Yes," Guilliman said, "you will have. But perhaps that is what is needed. Perhaps the Emperor's silence served its purpose, and that purpose has ended." He met my eyes. "Or perhaps you will discover that the silence must be maintained at all costs. That their return heralds the Imperium's final death. I do not know. That is why I need you to investigate, to determine the truth, to help me decide whether to prepare for their arrival as allies, or as enemies." He was giving me permission to destroy my life's work. More than permission, he was commanding it. The supreme irony. The ultimate erosion. I had emptied myself in service to the silence, and now the silence itself was being revoked. I should have felt something. Rage, grief, relief, anything. Instead, I felt only that terrible, familiar hollowness. And within it, the first stirring of something new. Not emotion. Not purpose. But curiosity. Clinical, cold. Pure. I wanted to know. I wanted to see what I had been guarding. I wanted to understand the shape of the void I had spent 3 centuries maintaining. I will investigate, my lord, I said. Guilliman nodded. Report your findings directly to me. Tell no one else of this conversation. The knowledge that they are returning must be restricted until we know how to manage it. He paused. And Lawmaster? Be careful. There are reasons the Emperor buried this knowledge. Reasons beyond politics or shame. Some truths are dangerous not because of what they reveal about the past, but because of what they suggest about the future. I left the sanctum with the data, slate in my possession. Returned to my chambers, sat in darkness, holding the device. 300 years of service. 300 years of maintaining the perfect void. And now, permission to fill it. To break it. To see what I had been protecting. I engaged the slate. The seal recognized my gene signature. Files bloomed across the screen, each one marked with classifications I had never seen before. Not just Umbra or Obsidian. New designations. Words in High Gothic that roughly translated to, the Emperor's regret, and the unavoidable truth. I began to read. The first file was a personal log from the Emperor himself, sealed and marked as written in the immediate aftermath of what it termed the Rangdan Genocides. The date placed it in the later stages of the Great Crusade, decades before the heresy. The Emperor's words were clinical, precise, exactly as I would expect from a being of perfect intellect. But beneath the clinical language, I detected something unexpected, something that might have been sorrow. It is done. The Second Legion is no more. Tiberius has been judged, and the judgment is final. His crime was not failure. Failure I could forgive. His crime was success achieved through means that cannot be allowed to exist in the Imperium I am building. He found a way to defeat the Rangdan permanently. A weapon, a methodology, a pact. The specifics do not matter. What matters is that deploying it required sacrifices I will not name, transformations I will not describe. He saved billions. He damned himself and all who followed him in the process. I offered him the choice: unmake what he had become, or accept exile. He chose exile. He said he could not unmake it, that the change was absolute. I believe him. I have looked into his eyes and seen what I created looking back at me, my son, my tool, my weapon, and I have seen that he has become something I no longer recognize. This is my fault. I made them too well, too specialized, too perfect for their singular purposes, and when those purposes demanded extremity, they did not hesitate. They did exactly what I designed them to do. The second must be forgotten, not because I am ashamed of Tiberius, but because I am ashamed of myself. I read the passage 3 times, then moved to the next file. The second file was similar. A record concerning the 11th Legion, a Primarch whose name had been deleted, but whose actions were preserved in terrible detail. A campaign against a threat the Emperor simply termed the corruptive truth, an alien species or entity that spread not through physical conquest, but through philosophical contamination. The conversion of populations to a worldview that made them incompatible with human civilization. The 11th Primarch had fought this threat for decades, had studied it, understood it, and finally defeated it through complete internalization of its methods. He had become what he fought, had transformed his entire legion into a mirror of the enemy, using their own techniques against them. And when the threat was eliminated, the Emperor had discovered that the 11th could not return to what they had been. The transformation was permanent. They had won the war by becoming the very thing they had destroyed. The Emperor's words were brief. I can allow many things in my Imperium. I cannot allow truth as contagion. The 11th has saved countless worlds, but they can never return to those worlds, lest they infect what they saved. Exile is the only mercy I can offer. More files, more detail. A fuller picture emerging. Both legions had succeeded at their assigned tasks. Both had become so specialized, so extreme in their methods, that they could no longer exist within the Imperium. Not because they had failed, because they had succeeded too completely. And the emperor, rather than destroy his own sons, had exiled them, had built for them a prison outside time, a place where they could exist without endangering what he was building. A mercy, a damnation, both. I found the technical specifications of the prison. A fold in space-time, maintained by the emperor's own psychic power, anchored to his throne on Terra. As long as he lived, the prison would hold. As long as he could maintain it, his lost sons would remain lost. But the emperor was dying, had been dying for 10,000 years, trapped on the golden throne, his power slowly ebbing as the mechanism failed and his body decayed. The prison was failing because he was failing, and when it finally collapsed, the lost Primarchs and their legions would return. I found projections. Analysis by the emperor's own hand, written before the heresy, contemplating the eventual failure of the exile. If they return, he had written, they will return changed. 10,000 years of isolation of existence outside time will have transformed them further. They may no longer remember what they were before. They may no longer understand the Imperium, may see it as something alien and wrong, or they may understand it perfectly and judge it accordingly. I do not know if their return will be salvation or catastrophe. I know only that I could not destroy them. I am not strong enough for that. I am only strong enough to delay the problem. To leave it for those who come after. Those who come after. Guilliman, me. All of us, scrambling in the ruins of the Emperor's dream. I read through the files for 17 hours straight. Absorbed every detail. Every projection. Every assessment of what might happen when the exile ended. The picture was clear. Terrible. Inevitable. The Second Legion, transformed into something beyond recognition in their fight against the Rangdan, would return as a force of absolute extremity. They had saved the Imperium once through methods the Emperor could not allow. Would they attempt to save it again? And if they did, could the Imperium survive their salvation? The 11th Legion, masters of philosophical corruption and counter-corruption, would return with 10,000 years of isolated contemplation. They had become truth, as weapon. What would they do when confronted with an Imperium built on lies? An empire sustained by ignorance, faith in place of understanding, orthodoxy enforced through violence. Would they see the current Imperium as something to be saved, or something to be corrected? I compiled my findings, prepared my report for Guilliman, worked through the night with the mechanical efficiency I had perfected over 3 centuries, and as I worked, I felt it. That absence, that hollowness, that terrible clarity. I was preparing to tell the Lord Commander that the lost Primarch's return would likely shatter the Imperium. That civil war was not just possible but probable. That we faced a choice between impossible alternatives: oppose the returning legions and fracture the Imperium in the fighting, or accept them and watch the Imperium transform into something unrecognizable. This was the most important work I had ever done. The fate of humanity itself hung on my analysis, and I felt nothing about it. I laughed then, a short, sharp sound that surprised me. When had I last laughed? I could not remember. I laughed because I finally understood. The great emptying was not a failure of faith. It was not a pathology. It was clarity. It was what happened when you looked at reality without the comforting filter of meaning, of purpose, of necessary belief. The Emperor had exiled his sons not because they were corrupt, but because they were too honest. Because they had looked at the problems before them and solved them with absolute efficiency, without regard for what it would cost them. They had traded their humanity for victory, and the Emperor had recognized that trade as something he could not allow in his Imperium. But what was I? What had I done? I had traded my humanity for efficiency. I had optimized myself into a perfect tool. I had become exactly what the lost Primarchs became, something that served its function flawlessly, but could no longer understand why the function mattered. I was their echo, their smaller, bureaucratic mirror, and now I was being asked to judge them, to assess whether their return was salvation or catastrophe. The irony was sublime. I finished my report at dawn, formatted it according to Administratum Standard, encrypted it with Guilliman's personal seal, prepared to transmit it. Then I paused, added one final section, personal observation, outside the formal analysis. Lord Commander, I have completed my investigation and my conclusions are attached. But I must note one additional finding that may be relevant. The Emperor exiled his sons, because they had transformed themselves into something that could not exist within his Imperium. They had solved their assigned problems by becoming the solution, at the cost of their own humanity. I have served the Imperium for 3 centuries, maintaining the silence regarding these sons. In that service, I have systematically replaced my capacity for feeling with capacity for function. I have become a tool, perfected for a single purpose. I believe I have undergone the same transformation as the lost Primarchs, simply on a smaller scale and over a longer time frame. I have become what I needed to become to do my work. And now that work is ending, and I find I no longer remember what I was before. I tell you this not to seek sympathy or remediation. I tell you because it suggests a pattern. The Imperium demands extremity from those who serve it. It requires its servants to sacrifice themselves completely to the function they perform. And the result is that those who serve most faithfully become least human. The lost Primarchs are not anomalies. They are the inevitable outcome of absolute service. And their return may not be a crisis to be managed, but a truth to be confronted. What is the Imperium? If it cannot survive the return of those who sacrificed everything to save it, what are we protecting if we must exile our most effective defenders? I do not have answers to these questions. I only note that they exist, and that they may be more important than the tactical considerations in my formal report. Lorimaster Hesperus Vrain, 6 Shield, Administratum. I transmitted the report. Then I sat in my chamber and waited. Guilliman's response came 3 hours later. A single line, report to Sanctum Imperialis, immediate. I made the journey again, the checkpoints, the processing, the simple chamber where the Primarch waited. He was reading my report on a data slate, did not look up as I entered. I stood in silence, watching him absorb the information I had compiled. Finally, he set the slate down, looked at me with those ancient, haunted eyes. Your formal analysis is excellent, he said. Thorough, precise, exactly what I needed. He paused. Your personal observation is heretical. Yes, my lord, I said. It suggests that the Imperium itself is the problem, that our methods create the very crises we then struggle to contain, that we are systematically destroying those who serve us best. He stood. Do you understand what you are saying? I am saying, I replied, that I no longer believe in anything. And from that position of complete emptiness, I can see clearly what I could not see when I still had faith. The Emperor exiled his sons to preserve an Imperium that was already dying. We continue to maintain that exile, to protect a corpse from the very beings who might be able to resurrect it, or grant it a clean death. Guilliman was silent for a long time. Then, when they return, what do you recommend? I recommend, I said, that we stop asking what their return means for the Imperium, and start asking what the Imperium has become, that we fear their return at all. Another silence. Then the Primarch did something unexpected. He laughed, a short bitter sound. You remind me of someone, he said. One of my brothers, the one who always asked the questions no one wanted to answer. His expression darkened. He fell to chaos during the heresy, because he asked those questions, and chaos gave him answers. Then perhaps, I said, the problem is not the questions, but the fact that only chaos offers answers. Guilliman's eyes narrowed. You walk a dangerous path, Loremaster. I walk no path, my lord. I am empty. I have no faith to lose, no corruption to fear. I am simply reporting what I see. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. Continue your work. Monitor the signs of their return. And when they finally emerge from exile, he paused. We will decide together what to do. And if they are hostile, then we will fight, as we have always fought. His voice was tired. As we will always fight. Because that is what the Imperium does. It consumes its children and calls it salvation. I left the sanctum, returned to my duties. But something had changed. Not in the work was the same. The anomalies still came. I still processed them, still maintained the silence, even as it failed a little more each day. What changed was my relationship to the emptiness. I had been fighting it, denying it, treating it as a pathology to be cured. Now I accepted it, embraced it, became it fully. I was hollow. To hollow things can be filled, or they can be broken open. Either way, they are honest about what they are. The anomalies continued to increase. Every day more references to the lost Primarch surfacing in historical records. People dreaming of figures in bronze and silver. Scholars finding documents that should not exist. The silence failing bit by bit as the prison that held the lost legions weakened. I catalogued each one. Not to suppress them anymore. Just to document. To create a record of how silence dies. Scribe Tertius Malin approached me one final time, 6 months after my meeting with Guilliman. We were in the vault, reviewing the daily reports. The anomaly count had reached 347. Unprecedented, impossible to suppress. Lore Master, he said quietly. The silence is ending. We can all see it. The Apex protocol is failing. The void is filling with something. He paused. What do we do? I looked at him. This man I had served beside for 40 years, whose faith had been as absolute as my own. Once upon a time, we're bear witness. I said, that is all we have left. To what? To the return of truth, whether that truth saves us or destroys us. I gestured to the screens around us, showing the flood of anomalies. They are coming back. The lost Primarchs, the forgotten legions. And when they return, we will finally learn what the Emperor was protecting us from. Or protecting them from. Or protecting himself from. Are you afraid? Malin asked. I considered the question, searched inside myself for fear, found only the familiar emptiness. No, I said. I am curious. I have spent 3 centuries maintaining a mystery I never understood. Now I will finally see what was inside the locked box. That is something. Perhaps the only thing left. Malin nodded slowly. Then I suppose we wait. We wait. I agreed. The months passed. The signs intensified. Warp storms erupting in patterns that matched the old heraldries of the lost legions. Battle, barges appearing at the edges of the Astronomican's light, bearing markings that had been deleted from all records. Vox transmissions in languages that had not been spoken in 10 millennia. I documented everything. Prepared comprehensive reports for Guilliman. Watched the Imperium begin to fracture in anticipation of what was coming. Some factions demanded the returning legions be destroyed on sight. They were the Emperor's exiles, and exile implied guilt. To allow them to return was to question the Emperor's judgment. Other factions saw them as saviors. The lost Primarchs, returned in the Imperium's darkest hour. Divine providence. The Emperor's final gift to his faithful. Both sides were preparing for war, not against external enemies, but against each other. The Imperium, tearing itself apart over the question of how to receive its own lost children. And I, hollow and empty and perfectly clear, watched it all with clinical fascination. I received a final summons from Guilliman 3 days before the projected emergence point. The calculations suggested the prison would fail completely within 72 hours. The lost legions would return to real space at the edge of the Segmentum Solar. I met him in the war room this time. Maps of the galaxy spread across every surface. Fleet dispositions. Army movements. Contingency plans for every possible scenario. It is happening, Guilliman said without preamble. They are coming. And we are not ready. We will never be ready, my lord, I said. How do you prepare for the return of a mystery? By choosing, he said. By deciding, before they arrive, whether we will greet them as brothers or enemies. He looked at me. You have monitored the discourse. You have seen the Imperium fracturing. What do you recommend? I thought of the Emperor's words, his shame, his recognition that he had created his sons too well, too perfectly, and that their perfection had destroyed them. I recommend, I said slowly, that we do not choose. That we wait. That we let them choose. That is not an acceptable answer. If we do not choose, others will choose for us. And their choices will lead to civil war. Then perhaps, I said, civil war is what we need. Perhaps the Imperium must fracture before it can be rebuilt. Perhaps we have been maintaining something that should have been allowed to die centuries ago. Guilliman's fist slammed into the table. The maps jumped. I will not preside over the Imperium's destruction. Then you will preside over its eternal decay, I said calmly. Because that is the only other option. This Imperium, this corpse we sustain with faith and ignorance and endless war, it cannot be saved. It can only be prolonged. And every day we prolong it, we make it more brittle, more fragile, more likely to shatter completely. You speak heresy. I speak truth. There is no difference anymore. I met his eyes. You asked me to investigate the lost Primarchs. I did. And what I found is that they were exiled for being too effective, too specialized, too honest about what had to be done to achieve victory. The Emperor could not allow that honesty in his Imperium. So he built a lie, a silence, a comfortable void where they should have been. And now the void is ending, Guilliman said quietly. And now we must choose, I said, whether to maintain the lie or confront the truth, whether to fight our own brothers to preserve an Imperium built on silence, or welcome them back and allow the Imperium to transform into whatever it must become. Guilliman turned away, looked at the maps, at the impossible task before him. I do not know what is right, he said finally. Neither do I said. But I know that not knowing is more honest than false certainty, and perhaps honesty is what we need now. Perhaps that is what they will bring. He nodded slowly, made his decision. Very well, we will not engage them on sight, we will wait, we will listen. And we will judge them by their actions, not by their exile. Some will call that weakness. Some will call it wisdom. History will decide which they were correct. He looked at me one last time. Thank you, Loremaster. You have served well. I have served emptily, I said. But perhaps that was what was needed. Someone who could look at this without faith or fear. Someone who had nothing left to lose. I left the war room. Returned to the vault one final time. Stood in the center of that great archive of forgotten things and felt the weight of 3 centuries of service. I had maintained the silence. And now the silence was ending. My life's work erased. My purpose, completed and obsolete. I should have felt grief, should have felt loss, should have felt something. But I was empty, perfectly, completely empty. And in that emptiness, I found a strange peace. I was the keeper of a void that no longer existed. I had guarded a mystery that was about to reveal itself. And when it did, I would finally know what I had been protecting. What I had sacrificed myself to maintain. The screens around me showed the latest data. The prison was failing rapidly now. Tears in the fabric of space-time, echoes of something vast approaching. They would emerge within hours. I sat down at my station, opened a final log entry. This is Loremaster Hesperus Vrain. 317 years of service to the Sixth Seal. Keeper of the Forgotten Truth. Guardian of the Silence regarding the 2nd and 11th Legions. The silence is ending. The lost Primarchs return. And I, who have spent my existence maintaining their absence, will finally see what I have been guarding. I do not know if their return will save the Imperium or destroy it. I do not know if they are saviors or catastrophes. I do not know if we should welcome them or fight them. I know only this: I have become empty in service to a mystery. I have optimized myself into a perfect tool and lost myself in the process. And now, at the moment when that service ends, I find that I am grateful. Because emptiness can see clearly. Emptiness does not flinch from truth. And whatever truth walks out of that failing prison, I will witness it without faith or fear. I was the architect of certainty. I built empires of silence in the Emperor's name. Now I stare into the void I created and see that it was never empty at all. It was full of all the truths we refused to confront. The lost Primarchs were not exiled because they failed. They were exiled because they succeeded too well, because they became exactly what we needed and exactly what we could not allow ourselves to be. And now they return. And we will learn whether the Imperium can survive the truth, whether we can accept our most effective servants, or whether we must destroy them to preserve the lie. I do not know the answer. I am only the keeper of the question. This is my final log. My purpose ends here. What comes next is for others to witness. I am ready. I closed the log, stood, walked to the center of the vault and waited. Above, in the void of space, the prison shattered. And the lost came home.